Welcome to Capitol Report, a weekly discussion with your elected officials on the issues and concerns that affect you.
Good evening once again, and thanks for joining us. The story out of Buena Vista schools is still in the news as state officials look into the issues of financial management and consolidation. Could the lessons there be learned maybe statewide? We'll ask my guest this week, Senator Darwin Booher, the Republican from Everett, in his first term representing the 35th District. Welcome, Senator. Thanks for joining us.
And thank you for having me on again.
It is our final program of this current 2013 season, so you get the last word on all the business out of Lansing. Could be a busy half hour ahead. Michigan Department of Education has approved the deficit reduction plan for Buena Vista schools, clearing the way for additional state aid payments and the finishing out of the current year. Wondering what the members of the two chambers of the legislature are beginning to talk about when it comes to oversight of Michigan's K-12 schools or budgeting, monitoring, all of these things in light of what has happened. Has there been much in the way of discussion so far?
Well, there was a lot of discussion on it right up front in how everyone that I was involved with was focused on the kids. I mean, there's been certainly an error on the part of those in charge of that school, and there has to be a penalty for that. But we have the Department of Ed who oversees the schools, and we were waiting for them to make a decision. Our focus was on our kids in that school system. So to use money out of the rainy day fund and some other ideas, we're only standby, emergency issue if we have to do this. But I think the right plan was put together, and hopefully that'll work. Focus was on our kids.
The school district's not specifically in yours, so we note that, and that you don't sit on any of those specific K-12 committees, but I'm wondering what your view is on what has happened here. One would have to rewind, I believe, 20 years to the situation where the Kalkaska schools were forced to close early in one particular year. We don't see situations like this very often. What is the takeaway as to what has happened here?
Well, I wasn't the senator, certainly for Kalkaska, but Kalkaska is in my Senate district now. And if you look at this, I think that all of our school boards, the people that are elected by the people to oversee and run our schools, should be very aware. The maybe 50 that have financial problems today that are serious, should look at this very closely and say, the state's not just necessarily going to bail you out, you better get some kind of plan together, because we want to see that now. This could hurt every other student in everybody's district. That money was taken from them as well, and so they should be asking those tough questions of the administrators of their schools to make sure all the money coming to us is appropriate and right.
There's some accounts now of over $2 million in stimulus funds that went to Buena Vista, an $800,000 loan, and the $400,000 that was sent there for running the alternative school that didn't open its doors this year. Your background, as we've talked before during your time with us, is as a banker. Would you have ever approved this much lending or spending to prop up what appears to be a real strong case of mismanagement in that local district?
You know, that's a pretty tough question. I mean, as a banker, and I'm looking at your loans, I never made a bad loan, but some went bad. And that's the issue here. I think the people that made those decisions for us are the people we entrust to make the right decisions. So I assume they thought it was right at the time, no more than I would have. Something went drastically wrong here. And so it's pretty hard to say whether or not I would have done that, but we know what the results and what happened and the possibility of those kids were going to be out of school, teachers weren't going to get paid. The lessons that have been learned from this, I think, all of the schools should take a look at it, because the state just isn't going to be there to bail you out every time. So you're elected by the people. We have to do the job.
We can bring this closer to home in the issue of consolidation. Superintendent Mike Flanagan has said that a system with over 500 districts is perhaps too big to maintain. We could be looking to further consolidation options. Your district covers 11 counties, many K-12 districts then as a result. Given some of the challenges in some of the more rural areas, especially when we look at the transportation question across some of those miles, would there be consolidation options that are being considered? Has it that particular issue, even separated from Buena Vista, has just in light of the economy and moving forward, has that been up and open for discussion with any of the school districts in your area?
No, no. And every time you sit down with a group of superintendents, and we do on a regular basis, Monday we'll meet with, I think there's 10 or 12 superintendents up in the Misaki, Wexford, Osceola area. Those are always things that you have in the back of your mind. Are those questions when you have struggles within some of your schools? And I have 34 public schools in my Senate district. But the consolidation of any of those has not hit a hot button yet in any of my discussions with those people.
What about the formula for funding? Is Proposal A still working when we see such a disparity still in funding? And I bring this back to, I mean, here, Buena Vista, you have an urban district that has seen an awful lot of population and enrollment decline, but we've seen also that trend, and sometimes it's just the way of life for some of our smaller rural districts. When we look at that base amount of funding, is Proposal A, I mean, is this one more avenue that brings us back to a discussion saying, are we even doing the right thing on the front end for paying for schools?
Well, you and I all know the people passed Proposal A. That Proposal A, and I was an assessor also, not just the banker, but assessor for 28 years, and I came through Proposal A as that assessor, so understood it and what it was supposed to do. It is done just exactly what it was supposed to do. If the values were going up, they go up. If the value was coming down, they come down. And that's what's supposed to happen. I think those people who live in their homes since 1994 and 95, when it really was kicking in, have been protected from that rapidly rising value of their house. They couldn't have lived on some of those farms that I live on with maybe 400 acres. You wouldn't have been able to afford to stay there if you hadn't had the cap there. So that's working exactly the way it was supposed to work. Now, the agreement that you had with the J20 schools in that, where they had a higher tax base, when you're arguing the issue or discussing the issue about funding for our schools, trying to get it, and we are gaining on that. We have been making strides, not as fast as everybody would like to think. But the difference now is about probably $1,200, not the $14,000 that some people talk about against the $7,000 that the lowest funded schools are, because there's federal money, local money in there. But the foundation grant difference is something about $1,200. So a slow movement, but it's still a movement in recognition as eventually we need to get that worked out. But in reality, your largest number of your senators come out of the southeast part of the state. And to change that, you think that you can draw 20 votes? There's 4 senators represent 43 counties out of 83. 4 senators. Now we got to get 16 more to agree with us south of M46. You think you're going to get that? That's the what you realize once you get down there. In our state reps that represent a large portion of our state, 14 of those, have to get another 56, I mean a total of 56, in order to get them to agree with what we have up here. So the real world and really getting it done, but the recognition that we are getting and the hammering that we continue to hammer to get that equalized is being recognized. And it's slow, but we're gaining. And that's the positive side, the way I see it. Proposal A, though, to take it out, is not the way to go yet. It's doing exactly what it was set up to do.
As for what's being taught in the classroom, there's been a level of pushback so far from Lansing when it comes to compliance with what's coming from the federal government and the Common Core. Do you have any assessment from what we look at right now as our current state standards and graduation requirements?
Yeah, I think that Common Core question is still an open debate. And I will bring that up. That's on the agenda Monday with our superintendents up in our area. As you know, certainly I'm the last of the discussions on this issue. It was the states from the government position that there ought to be a minimum requirement, English and math, that the states adopted this in 2010. The states did that, 45 of them. And so they saw something in this that they all agreed that ought to be a certain level of requirements for our students to graduate and enter on into college. So I think around that, there's certainly a lot of that I would agree with that says that we should have these minimum standards. We cannot take away our local control over there. Those are our kids locally. And so I'm stayed and have stayed open on this discussion. I'll listen again to our superintendents and what they're saying. And even in our superintendents one-on-one that I talk to, there's a difference of opinion on the Common Core and the good, or the good that does or doesn't do. So we stay open on this issue, and we'll continue to discuss this with those in charge back in our own districts.
My colleague for CMU Public Radio News, Mike Horace, recently spoke with you about something that isn't being taught as much as you would think that it should be, and that's some basic financial literacy, and maybe finding a way to work that into that real-world kind of knowledge base and foundation for students as they come out. What would it take then to move that into a more common part of the curriculum? And this gets into probably the whole idea of how those things are modified, and it would be quite a process, but tell us about your efforts to do that.
Well, we passed the resolution the other day in support of financial literacy, and I see that as 41 years of sitting down with people as one of the biggest parts of the real world is to be able to balance your checkbook, know that you can't spend more than you take in. That's how simple that is. You and I talk about that. How hard it is to do. I mean, as you look at the credit card run-ups, the mortgage failures, the mortgage foreclosures, that's somebody either telling people that they can't afford something that they really can't, or coming back to the fact that they never understood it in the beginning. And so I believe we have to get back there as part of how am I going to survive in the world tomorrow after I get out of school, is to have an understanding, a basic understanding. It needs to be part of it.
Governor Snyder recently signed into law a bill that you co-sponsored that would allow veterans designation to appear on state IDs. What will this do in terms of an impact for our servicemen and women?
Well, I seen it as a big deal. I mean, when our veterans are sacrificed like they have, and there is things happening, the discounts, and I walk in and I can't take advantage of it. I don't have my DD 114 form with me, or something that somebody can't prove. I can't prove immediately that I'm a veteran. What is wrong with having an ID card or having a on your driver's license? It seemed to me that just made sense. They verify that you're a veteran, that you were honorably discharged from a service of this country, then put it on there. And so I just say, here, and I'll have that driver's license with me all the time, or an ID card with me all the time, so I can take advantages of those kind of promotions. And I thought it was a pretty common sense type thing to do, and the right thing to do for our veterans.
You're also the lead sponsor on a package of bills that focused in on private forest lands. What can you tell us about what that entails and where we are in terms of that legislation moving through?
Yeah, so I would like to talk about that one, because I think that's a huge economic piece of the recovery of the state of Michigan. Our logging industry has suffered through this recession. Our mills have closed down. My grandfather was had a heart attack, died. He was still working in the mill. and so logging and background for my family, I have a feeling for that business and that industry. So this package would say we have 11 million acres of private forest lands in Michigan. What would the incentive need to be? To have them set up a plan and have a long-term plan to manage that just like you do agriculture, just like your fields that you have. And that started the whole process under what we had in place called Qualified Forest Program. Didn't work the first go-round. This, I went out and asked, what would it take? What was the problems with the first? We had put limits that says 18 mills would be exempt off of your taxes if you would set up a plan. We found out that because they couldn't have their buildings on it, no buildings could be on it, the penalty to get out of it was greater than the savings that I had. And was two of the big challenges for people to sign up. And we only, after several years, only had 90,000 acres signed up. And we had planned to have 1.2 million already signed up. So we went back and rewrote those bills. And there's a package of 9. 3 of those bills have, from the House side, passed the Senate and been sent to the governor already. The other ones are sitting in the House, ready for approval and moved on to the governor. 1 or 2 issues that we're still working with the governor on, and hopefully Monday we'll have those worked out and those will be sent to him. But it will be in the hands of agriculture, not in DNR now. I felt very strongly that the DNR had 4.5 million acres of its own to try to manage, to hand 11 million more acres on their back. They don't have the staff to keep up with this. Agriculture says it can, we will, and they can, with the help of our soil conservation departments. We'll put that into play and be managed by agriculture, which is where it should be. And I think this will be a success story in the years to come because people, I think, will put their property up and manage it. Forestry, lumbering companies will know when they're due and when they come up and what their product is. They have maples, they have popples, they have spruce, whatever it is that they have on there, they'll know all of that. And it'll be very helpful to our people making decisions on should I put a mill in here, shouldn't I do this. I believe for the economy of the state it's going to be jobs and more jobs.
Well, you framed it that way. There's several suggestions again about how we can spend or not spend some extra revenue, the so-called windfall that we're learning of that's come into the state from the improved economic activity to date. As we sit down on this Friday, the May revenue estimates have just come out, and you introduced a bill that would put the January and May estimating conferences under the state's unfunded liabilities. How would this work and what would be the result?
Yeah. Well, what I've introduced was saying that one piece missing in the revenue estimated conferences in January, and being this was my 9th budget that I've been on, we never have a number on our unfunded liabilities. This number should be available to us because if you don't have it on your balance sheet where you can see it, but it's a debt of the state, we ought to know what that is. Is it growing? Is it going down? Is there departments borrowing? And we don't know those totals. I think it's very important for us that manage the budget to know what our unfunded liabilities are. When we were talking about our schools and their unfunded liabilities of $50 billion, and we have made big strides in reducing that at the expense of a lot of heartache by a lot of people to say we're going to have a different type of plan over time, but we can't fund it. Same problem our cities have, you know, that have these unfunded liabilities, Detroit particularly. And so I want us to put that out on the record so that we know what it is. I asked this just for a little side note to that, how much has our unfunded liabilities dropped over the last 90 days because of our stock market and going to record highs? We dropped $3 billion, now billion dollars in unfunded liabilities in that 3 months. Now, so is that improves the position? I think all of us should know what that is. And so that's the rationale behind my push to make that part of the revenue estimating conference.
The IRS is making some negative news regarding alleged targeting of certain political groups. Earlier this year, you introduced a resolution urging the IRS to, as you termed it, protect community colleges from provisions of the Affordable Care Act. You have a direct committee position when it comes to the funding for our community colleges. So what can you tell us about the resolution and how community colleges could be seeing an impact from the federal health care?
Yeah, that was something that was brought up as the chairman for 9 years now, or minority vice chair of community colleges. We've gotten a pretty good understanding of the needs of our community colleges. They came to me and asked me as the chairman if I would put that up. And when I asked the question, well, you ought to know what the Affordable Care Act is going to cost us. And that's what that resolution does. It says here, you will report that, and we'll can track it and find out and continue to track to what the costs are. And so I see that as a positive. That's what the community college wanted as well.
Money's been allocated for harbor dredging, and we're learning that Senator Carl Levin's efforts to access federal funds has pointed to some more money being made available to address the waterways. You introduced a bill that would require more regular assessments to be done to determine the need for dredging. What is the status as we sit down today of that bill?
Yeah, well, that is still there. It still has not been passed yet, but I think that will eventually get done. When you're dredging, and I see roughly $21 million cost to dredge, and know within 3 years I could have to dredge again, we need to take a long-term look at this. And we're talking about 49 locations, or we're 58 total when we get done with this. But that's not the end of that. So we need to be able to look at this and say, is the federal government money coming in? The state of Michigan, that's why they pay the assessments on the freighters, and is to help keep these open. So we need to know a long-term plan, though, to fix those ports so that we don't have this continuous dredging going on. This is an emergency for the state, the economy of the state, our tourism business, and so we need to get it done now. But from our push, from what we did, I think that is why the federal money has been released. That's $6 billion when we got into the conference call on that, and our concerns was why were they setting on that $6 billion? Well, it was spent already, not really though. It was used to support other budgets. That was the explanation. We committed to cover other budgets. The money's sitting there yet, $6 billion. So I think after that discussion, that's when this happened and got released. So we're going to be able to do some more things that we weren't going to be able to do, that we postponed, like in Higgins Lake and Arcadia, that were on the plans for harbor monies to be, they were to get support there this year and all around the state, but those in my district. Hopefully we'll be able to do those projects that we had approved already to be done in this year that were set aside under the dredging bill. So I see us getting, by them releasing some of that money, being able to get back to some of the projects we'd already approved.
Final question. I wish we had more time, but the final answer and the final word, the June 1st-ish deadline to get the entire budget done, are we on track?
You're on track. And we put the last one out of the Senate, which was the community health budget, this week. That budget is $15,200 million of a $48 billion budget. So I think what I'd like the people to understand that we're almost, this appropriation is almost equal to last year. It isn't what the governor's proposal was, and what we have approved is different because of road funding and Medicaid expansion. And those two are out right now, so we're almost equally very close with 1% of what the budget was last year. And thus it's set on that. I think this is the right thing to do right now. Not that there won't be some kind of a workout on Medicaid sometime. Right now it's not. And there'll be some continuous work, and I'm on the committee for infrastructure, to continue to work on our road funding, because we do have a problem in the roads, no question about it. But we're willing, and we are taking those on. So I think your big issues that the people should understand, get that budget out by June or the first weeks of June, as we have the last two, to take care and continue to work on our roads, continue to work on the Medicaid expansion, continue to work on no fault. Huge issues for the state of Michigan, but there's not a one that I know of that's afraid to take that those issues on. And election year or not, doesn't matter. The fact is, this group of people in the Senate and the governor are not afraid to take those and tackle them. And obviously, since 2011, people know that. And this increase in our money is an indication of we've made some of the right calls in 2011 that has helped turn this around. And our housing is a big indicator when you got 75 to 80% up over last year in sales of your houses. So, yeah.
Some things out there then still, as you said, to be dealt with, but that is the last word for now. Thank you for joining us and bringing us up to speed where we leave that discussion for now.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, as always, for your time and attention throughout the season. We'll soon be adding this program to the others that have come from this spring, posted on our website. Thanks to Lee Perriard for his coordination and effort in doing just that. Thanks to our director, Chris Ogazali, and also Matt Osenik for his work in directing some of our programs this season, and also for his work on the production crew. Most of those have included the involvement as well from my TV colleagues, Courtney Brooks, Sarah Adams, Kurt Wilson, and Brian Baker. We want to thank them. And if you have any questions or comments, you can find my email link on the Capitol Report page, which you can find through our website, and the TV link at WCMU.org. For all of us here at Capitol Report, we will talk again in 2014. I'm David Nicholas. Thanks again for being with us.
You've been watching Capitol Report. Join us again as your elected officials speak to your concerns on current issues.